Welcome to Fuzzybutts and Friends. Well, as much as it drives Fuzzybutts all over this place absolutely crazy when they hear me say it, I am the host of this show, Yer Big Dog, Luke Robinson. And unfortunately, I do not have my co-pilot this episode, Ginger Morgan, the executive director of the Puppy Up Foundation. She's been diagnosed with laryngitis. We just shot a podcast yesterday. She struggled through. We were hoping she'd be better, but nope, she can't even speak a word. And as our regular listeners know, it's probably because she does all the yapping on these episodes. No, she rarely even talks. But we're going to miss her this episode. We hope she feels better. We'll be back very soon. But I am very, very happy and honored to introduce our guest today's part of our canine cancer series that we've started with season 2. It's Dr. Jaime Modiano. I hope I did justice to your beautiful Italian name. He's with the University of Minnesota. He also has Modiano Labs. He's doing a lot of great, exciting research in hemangiosarcoma. We've got lots of things to talk about. Welcome to Fuzzybutts and Friends, Dr. Modiano.
Thank you, Luke. It's a pleasure to be here, and a shout out to Ginger, hoping that she gets better soon.
Thank you very, very much. Yeah. She really is. She does a lot of the background stuff. So if I get stuck on anything, it's because my co-pilot, my trusty co-pilot, isn't here today. But we'll forge through, as it were. Well, we like to start off the show, Dr. Modiano, with something we call your origin story. I guess everybody's a superhero these days. So tell us, Dr. Modiano, how did you get your start in veterinary medicine?
Yeah, far from a superhero, but I've been interested in animals and nature since I have memory. And like many kids, I found, wild animals and exotic animals really intriguing. And so our high school had a track, and I tracked in biological sciences. I did my undergraduate work at Texas A&M and was connected with some phenomenal researchers, Dr. John Wolfe and Dr. Jim Womack, both of who were geneticists in their own right. I then moved on to the University of Pennsylvania, where I did the combined degree program for veterinary medicine and a PhD in immunology, working with Dr. Peter Knoll, who I think by all criteria is the father of modern cancer genetics. And so I got my appetite whet for both immunology and genetics, which has been really the crux of the work that I've done since. After I completed that work, I did a residency in clinical pathology at CSU, postdoc at National Jewish, and I've been on the faculty at Texas A&M, at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, and now at the University of Minnesota. And somebody was joking with me that they're impressed that Minnesota has put up with me for 17 years, considering how quickly other people decided to be rid of me, so to speak. But it's an inside joke. So I've been at the University of Minnesota directing our animal cancer care and research program and running my own research lab for 17 years now.
Yeah, you've got quite an operation there at University of Minnesota. You guys are doing some wonderful research in brain cancer as well, correct?
Yeah, we have. We are fortunate to have Dr. Liz Pluhar, and now Dr. Susan Arnold has joined the team recently, and a great team of collaborators across the university. So at the School of Medicine, the School of Public Health, that are really focusing on brain cancer in children and adults, and the work that they're doing is absolutely phenomenal. And we are so excited because a lot of the work that was started by Liz and her colleagues flowing into our veterinary clinic to treat dogs with brain cancer is actually now in clinical trials for kids and for adults. So the technology is moving fast and bidirectionally, and this is exactly the type of work that we want to foster at the University of Minnesota.
That's wonderful. Well, tell us about your Fuzzybutts. This is Fuzzybutts and Friends. Do you have any Fuzzybutts of your own?
I do. I don't know that they would appreciate being called that, but they do actually have very fuzzy butts. I have 2 wonderful German Shepherd girls. Their names are Alcy for Alsatian, and Mora. Her long name is Zarzamora. Alcy is 5 and Mora is just under 2, and they're best pals, and they keep my wife and I in good order, as all German Shepherds do.
Well, hopefully we won't get canceled by referring to female dogs as having fuzzy butts or being fuzzy butts. But that's wonderful. With Ginger, if she was here, she her heart dog that sort of her started her on this journey with cancer in our canine population was Pete. He was a wonderful German Shepherd. I wish you had them here. We don't often have fuzzy butts actually on Fuzzy Butts and Friends, but you look like you're in the office setting there. So
Yeah, unfortunately, they are not with me today. I'm in our lovely cancer center research building, and the girls are home with my wife, who actually is now enjoying her life as a work from home mom. So full-time job, but she's got two office mates with her all the time. So it works out great for them and for us.
So I'm just out of curiosity, Alsatian is an interesting name for a German Shepherd, Alsace-Lorraine. I don't think German Shepherds come from there, do they? Or why the name?
So it's an interesting story, but the very short version is that for those people who remember back in the days of World War II, when the Germans and the Brits were not fond of each other, German Shepherds were very popular in Britain, but the Britons refused to refer to them as German Shepherds, and so they renamed them based on the area of origin, which is the border area between France and Germany, which is the Alsace. And so in Great Britain, you will hear the German Shepherd breed sometimes being referred to as Alsatian.
Wow, that's fascinating. I love history. I love science like you. I never knew that. That's an interesting fact. All right, well, let's get into it. As you mentioned before, we have a lot of ground to cover. Let's start off, Dr. Modiano, at the macro level. Tell us about what you're seeing in cancer in the canine population. You are, just to clarify, you're a teacher, you're a researcher, but you're also a clinician, right? You also see patients as well, correct?
I do not
Cool.
actually. So my clinical training is in pathology, specifically in clinical pathology. So the clean version. I still do a fair bit of pathology in my research, but I have not been in the clinic since 1999. So I had a clinical appointment when I was at Texas A&M. And when I moved to the University of Colorado, where my appointment was at the medical school, the administration frowned upon a veterinarian signing off reports on human patients. So I moved on to do entirely research, teaching, and administration. And when I moved to the University of Minnesota, I sort of kept that role. So every so often they will ask me to consult on a case, but yeah, I am no longer a bona fide clinician. I live that vicariously through all my colleagues.
Well, I would love to have more board certified veterinary oncologists out there treating patients, but I totally appreciate that we need researchers in the lab doing next generation research out there in canine cancer. So cheers to you on that. Well, what are you seeing? Give our audience a sense of what does cancer in the canine population look like? How bad is it? How treatable is it? What are the trends? What are we seeing out there, Dr. Modiano?
Yeah, so I think that there's some new perspectives that are coming up, and this is some work that I think we're not the only ones that are looking at this, but I think we're at the forefront of trying to understand what some people refer to as the cancer epidemic. And I think that for most of our scientific life understanding cancer over now maybe 70 years, and further depending on how far you want to go. The emphasis has been on exposures and mutations. And there's certainly a role of exposures and mutations in cancer. We know that exposures to a variety of toxicants and mutagens can increase cancer risk. And we also know that mutations are a major driver. But one of the things that I think has been under-recognized is that when you look across the animal kingdom, cancer occurs in every multicellular species. But it occurs at a much higher rate in humans and in dogs, and to a certain extent in cats than it does in other animals. And the question is why? And so the easy explanation that people have come up with is that humans and dogs live in a toxic cesspool of things that we have done to ourselves, and this is what's giving us cancer. I think what people have failed to appreciate is that humans and dogs and cats are really the only two species or three species where we have dramatically increased our lifespan in a matter of 50 to 200 years. So when you look at cancer, everybody understands that cancer is a disease of aging, not to underplay the role of pediatric cancers or cancers in young animals, but it is mostly a disease of aging. Humans evolved over millions of years to a lifespan of about 45 years. Dogs evolved over millions of years to a lifespan of about 4 years. Elephants evolved over millions of years to a lifespan of about 80 years. And so when you look at the rate of cancer in elephants over 80 years, in humans over 40 years, and in dogs over 4 years, there's very little difference. The rate of cancer in the 3 species, and that goes on to extrapolate to any species that you like, flamingos, alligators, chickens, is actually quite low. It's somewhere in the single-digit percent. But as we cross that evolutionary determined age boundary, meaning as humans go beyond the age of 35, 40, 45, and as dogs go beyond the age of 4.5, we start seeing a rapid increase in cancer. And what this is telling us is that we have evolved cancer protective mechanisms and aging protective mechanisms that are operative for a certain period of time. And just like a car that you purchase and is intended to go 100,000 miles starts breaking down more often as you go longer than that, humans and dogs are going to be at increased risk of cancer simply because of the vulnerabilities of aging. That includes our aged cellular environment, our aged immune system. We are simply more susceptible. Plus, if you think about it, to the extent that exposures and mutations matter, the longer we live, the more exposures we have and the more mutations. So I think that's been an underappreciated context. And as we look at dogs and humans and we see the similarities and the differences that occur in the 2 species when we look at cancer, and the fact that about 1/3 of the human population and 1/3 of the dog population might develop cancer in their lifetime and probably succumb to it. We are really seeing that aging effect much more starkly, in that even though there's some big differences in the cancers that occur in humans and dogs, that context is really similar. So in terms of what we're seeing, I think we're seeing more cancer because we're living longer. I think we're seeing more cancer because we can diagnose it a lot better. And I think we're seeing more cancer because we recognize it better. I think there's also a very big social and emotional impact. Cancer is a scary thing. It's so scary that we have made it our vision at the University of Minnesota to create a world where we no longer fear cancer. So we understand that because animals are built in a DNA blueprint, and DNA is an inheritable reactive chemical molecule that mutates, we can't eliminate all cancers ever. So a world without cancer is essentially impossible. But a world where we don't fear cancer and where we can minimize its impact is something that is possible, and where we have focused our vision. I think that as we diagnose more cancer, we also claim more success in managing and treating the disease. And I think that the real distinction that's going to be apparent over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years is whether our wins are coming because we're just picking up cancers that we were going to be able to treat, or because they weren't going to be really harmful, or whether we're really making a difference in those, life-threatening terminal cancers. And I think right now, I'm optimistic. I think we are making a difference in many of the life-threatening terminal cancers. But I think the jury is out, right? You don't write history while you're living it. But I think we are making incredible progress, and I'm very excited about the work that's going on in my lab, at our institution, as well as across the nation and the world.
Yeah, it's a complex scenario, and it's tough to claim victory or success when we have 6 million new cases of cancer in our canine companions every year, if that's the number that we're going with. I know some people use different numbers, but I think everyone's using 6 million new cases, and that's a lot. And it certainly puts a tremendous tax on our resources out there from the veterinary oncology community. But what I want to get to, something you said a second ago, and it speaks to your training and your experience, is, I get the question out there a lot. Our foundation, the Puppy F Foundation, we funded research in comparative oncology. And so I travel a lot around the country, and I still get questions from pet parents about cancer. Is it genetic? Is it environment? And it's not. It's a complex cascade of both, as you know. And I like what you said about evolutionary evolutionarily, we are designed or programmed to have a lifespan of this. We have extended that out significantly. But so how close are we, Dr. Modiano, to understanding this complex cascade and interaction between environment and genetics? Are we any closer to understanding that?
We are, for sure. There's a couple of things that I think are really worth noting. And one is what I like to refer to as the analogy of looking for your keys under the lamppost, because that's where the light is, but you drop your keys half a mile away, right? And so a lot of the information that we have really comes from looking at things that we know. And in the famous words of a former Secretary of Defense, we don't know what we don't know. And so but I think given that there is a renewed emphasis to really try to apply discovery to those things that we don't know and go where the data take us. So it's very easy to ask a question about something we know and to make a prediction about that one thing we know. And one of the things that I think we're trying to change is the context of like one gene diagnostics or one marker diagnostics, right? So there was a day back decades ago where we could only measure one liver enzyme, and we would make a diagnosis about liver disease based on one liver enzyme. And now we know that liver enzymes are a dynamic component of liver function, and they go up and they go down. And we can be much more certain of what's happening in the liver when we look at them as a group, right? And we figure out, are they moving together in the same direction? Are they moving in opposite directions? And so as we look at cancer and we start thinking about our ability to understand the drivers and the things that will actually help us prognosticate, we need to move away from, individual markers or ideas to say, there's a mutation in this gene, ergo the tumor has to be responsive to this gene, because that has only worked in isolated examples, and it does not translate universally. So I think we have to be really careful about that. I do love the fact that there are now companies commercially trying to apply this information. And I think by and large, there are legitimate companies that understand that it is not a simple one-to-one relationship, right? That these are complex issues, and that we don't have all the answers. And even if we had the knowledge about that mutation, we don't always have the right drug to target that mutation, or we don't understand the pharmacology in dogs. And so I think people are going about it in a much more educated and rational way now than they did before. But I still think we have a long way to go, and trying to understand this interaction between heritable susceptibility and how much that contributes, and the role that the environment plays, and the role that random chance plays, right? That a lot of the mutations that happen that might drive susceptibility just happen at random because of something that might have gone wrong in cell division that is not predisposed or programmed into the genome. So I think that there's a lot of interactions that we have to play a role in. And one of the things that is my pet thing is to tell people to stop working on intrinsic bias. So I will give you an example. A golden retriever walks into the room, and the clinician, the nurse, the technician, the student, the intern, the owner are all anticipating that the golden retriever has cancer because they have heard that goldens get a lot of cancer, right? And the reality is that we know a lot about golden retrievers because there's a lot of them, because their owners are incredibly participatory. They're as a group, they are really proactive, and they're very open. So there's a lot of information about cancer in golden retrievers, but there is not the same amount of information of, say, cancer in poolies. And it's not that owners of poolies are, less adept than owners of golden retrievers. And it's not that poolies are privileged. It's just that we don't have as many poolies as we have golden retrievers. And so we don't know the answers. And I think it's really important to recognize the biases that exist in our databases when we go back and we try to extrapolate, what happened over the last 10 years. They can't all be corrected statistically. Some of them can be mitigated, but they can't fully be corrected. And so when we talk about golden retrievers this and golden retrievers that, or German shepherds, or your favorite breed as being a cancer dog, I think we have to be really, really careful about trying to understand that it may just be a dog, right? That a golden retriever and a Bernese Mountain Dog and the miniature poodle are all members of the dog family. And they look different, and we have bred in extremely different behaviors and physical traits and appearance. But at some point, the underlying susceptibility for aging and cancer within some variants that we recognize that may be related to size and metabolism is not all that different. And so for people that say, oh my God, I will not get a dog that is related to this other dog because its third cousin died of cancer, that really is a fallacy. You have to remember that again, most cancers occur well beyond reproductive age. It is not something that is heritably transmitted like single gene diseases. And so when people tell me, the sire and the dam of my 14-year-old were diagnosed with cancer, I remind them that we only think about heritable cancers in people's syndromic cancers that are truly genetically predisposed. We might not know what the gene is, but we know that they happen across multiple individuals in the family. They usually happen early. There's usually multiple cancers that arise. So I say, when you give me a litter of 7 dogs, out of which 6 got cancer when they were less than 2 years old, and they had multiple cancers, then I'm really interested in trying to go and fish that single gene. And we have 2 examples, right, of heritable cancers that have been reported. But once those are identified, we can remove them from the breeding population and they're gone. So again, this idea that there's cancer-prone families and cancer-prone breeds, yes, there might be some differences among breeds, but I think a lot of it is based on just our incomplete understanding and our intrinsic bias of how we appreciate dogs and breeds and the things that we like and the things that we think are important.
Well, let's try to break it down for our audience a little bit more simply then, because we can't control, to a certain extent, the heritable aspect of cancer, but we can, to a certain extent, control risk factors. So what risk factors, Dr. Modiano, do you look at, does your lab look at, that are the primary ones that pet parents need to be concerned with?
That is a great question. And the most honest answer is we don't know. If anybody gives you an answer with any certitude, they're trying to sell you something. So what are some of the things that are emerging in terms of data? I think that there is a reasonable consensus that lean body mass is a healthy state. And that has been shown to be true in mice and in dogs and in monkeys and in humans. And I think that in order to maintain lean body mass, you can starve yourself or your dog, which is not a great idea, or you can eat a well-regulated, appropriate diet and have exercise. And I think that the idea of having physical and mental activity is tremendously beneficial for aging in general. So it doesn't mean that if you exercise like a beast, or if you exercise your dog like a beast, you're absolutely going to prevent cancer. But I think that the likelihood that the cancer will manifest is lower because you maintain that healthier environment. When I say healthy diet, I think that it's really important to note that there is no data in mice, in rats, in humans, in dogs, in monkeys, or in any other species that has been looked at, that there is a specific dietary component that is cancer preventive. So there's a lot of emphasis on antioxidants, cruciferous vegetables, this, that, and the other, and the data are fragmentary at best, poorly reproducible, and there has been a really incredibly positive emphasis through the American Association for Cancer Research in particular to understand the link between nutrition and a healthy lifestyle that reduces the incidence of cancer or improves the life of those people that are affected with cancer. And I think the first thing that the consensus will say is we are just starting. So when people say, my dog got cancer because I fed it a diet, the answer is no. Your dog got cancer because there's a lot of things that happen, and the diet to the extent that it might have contributed, it was really minimal. So for example, obesity is not carcinogenic. Cancer cells love fat as an energy source. So if there's two individuals, one that has greater fat mass in their body and one that has lower fat mass in their body, and both of them have an emerging cancer, the one that has greater fat mass might actually develop a clinical disease faster because the cancer cells have lots of food to eat, and they can thrive in that environment. Whereas the one that has lean body mass, the cancer cells have a much harder time surviving, and so the clinical condition might be delayed. But it's not that they got cancer because they were obese or overweight or had greater body fat. It's just that creates an environment that's suitable for the cancer cell. So I think it's really important to think about that. There's also fragmentary data on exposures. So personally, I avoid using herbicides and pesticides, and we are non-smokers, and we avoid places where there's use of tobacco, generally because it's a smart thing to do. And it's not because, any of those things are going to necessarily cause cancer. So we know there's a tenfold increase in cancer risk in the lung in smokers and in non-smokers. That is undeniable. But tobacco has 10,000 toxic compounds that cause mutations and that change the environment of the lungs and the body where cancer can thrive. So it makes sense, right? If you smoke, quit. There are many, many ways to do organic gardening and stuff where you can reduce the use of pesticides. Why should we do that? Because we protect pollinators. It's better for our world, right? So I think that there's a healthy living that doesn't need to include fear of cancer or unproven associations. My neighbor sprayed their yard, or I walked my dog in the cemetery where they, put a lawn fertilizer, and 5 years later, my dog developed cancer, and that's a connection. So I think we just have to be a little bit more objective.
Yeah, that's a great. That's just a great way to look at it and to state it about risk factors. I know I've talked to risk factors to I don't know, dozens and dozens of veterinary oncologists I've met on my travels. That's always one of the questions I ask is that what are the top 3 risk factors? And you always get exposure to environmental chemicals as being one of them, diet, nutrition being the other. And then the third one I get often is multiple vaccinations, which we'll get to in a second. But I like how you broke down diet, nutrition, in that don't think of it in terms of a kibble versus raw diet. Just make sure your canine companion is healthy, and that includes not obese, right? Just try to minimize as many microenvironments as you can that cancer can thrive and grow in. But the question I have for you, since you have a background in immunology as part of a bigger question is there any validity to the concern of multiple vaccinations as being one of the contributing or risk factors to cancer?
I have not seen any data that would support that. I have not seen any legitimate, credible data that would support that.
But that's kind of the problem overreaching our entire discussion, though, right? There's just not these long-term studies that we need to do on diet, nutrition, kibble versus raw. That requires a very large population of dogs over a very long period of time in which you control so many of the variables that you can, be assured that you can make a positive correlation, right? But as you know, those studies are very, very expensive, and we just don't have the resources in the veterinary oncology world right now.
So immunologically speaking, if you think of our evolutionary path again, in a state of nature, we were not exposed to one antigen at a time. The only correlative to vaccine is a pretty significant exposure, right? So what we would normally think of as an infection, rather than simply encountering that organism. If you go back in history, the cause of death for most humans prior to the Industrial Revolution was due to infectious agents. And one of the ways that we have been able to extend our lifespan past 40 has been through the development of vaccines, antibiotics, and other medical needs. And so when you think about how the immune system has evolved, there is very little reason to think that multiple vaccines would necessarily set the stage for cancer. On the contrary, if you hyperactivate the immune system, you're much more likely to develop some form of autoimmunity. And even those claims in the context of dogs that get multiple vaccines at the same time get autoimmunity are way overstated. The data are weak. I think that in many cases statistics were misapplied. So I think that there's just no good evidence to say that vaccinations are associated with any risk. Now, of course, there is the feline vaccine-associated sarcoma where there's a very tight correlation, right? We know that there is an association there. And to the best of our knowledge, although we don't know the entirety of the mechanisms, I think the consensus is that the vaccine changes the inflammatory and microenvironment of the cat at the site of vaccination. That again, it doesn't cause cancer, but if there is an underlying smoldering or emerging cancer, it creates a better environment for that cancer to live. We have not seen that in any other animal, so there's something about kitty cats. And the immune system and the reaction to some of the adjuvants in vaccines in kitty cats that is very different from what we see in dogs or other animals or humans. So I think we need to be very clear about what the risk is for vaccine-associated sarcomas in cats, which is an isolated, very well-defined and true occurrence, and the idea or the notion that vaccinations are pathological in dogs or in children or in adult humans, and there's really no evidence for that. Now, I'll tell you a personal anecdote. I went to see my physician at the end of last year, and I needed to get, I'm of a certain age, so I needed to get my dose of shingles vaccine, and it was late fall, and I needed to get my flu vaccine, and I needed to get my COVID vaccine. And I had a very candid conversation with my personal physician, who is a great doctor and someone that I love dearly. And so he said to me, well, you can choose to feel terrible for one day because we can give you the 3 vaccines and I guarantee you'll be knocked out the next day. Or you can come back 3 times, right? I love to see you in my office. You're welcome to come back 3 times. And then you can feel crummy for 3 days, right? 3 separate instances. So personally, I chose to feel crummy for one day and get all my vaccines at once. When I talked to my wife, she said, I would have absolutely chosen to feel less crummy for 3 days and to feel really crummy for one day. Because, she saw me flat out in bed and said, you look horrible. And I felt that. But, 24 hours later, I was fine. So I think that, again, it's a personal choice and the choice that we make with incomplete information. But when people say, I do not want to give my dog X, Y, or Z vaccine because I'm afraid my dog will get cancer or autoimmune disease, I think that the more appropriate question is, does my dog need the vaccine, right? So is my dog currently protected from whatever they want to vaccinate against? Is there a law that tells me I have to give my dog vaccine because if there's an accident, I might have to surrender my dog and potentially have him euthanized or her euthanized? It's very, very different if you have a dog that lives in a high-rise penthouse in New York and only goes outside twice a day to pee, than if you have a dog that's traveling the show circuit and is surrounded by hundreds of dogs, right? So those are 2 very, very different situations. And I think we need to be smarter and more realistic about adapting our interventions and our recommendations to the actual needs of our patients and our family members, rather than having a blanket discussion that says, this is what we do. And I think that, our philosophy here is very much patient-centered, trying to understand what the needs of the patient and the family are, and trying to provide the options that work best for them, rather than simply having a rote aspect that says, this is the way we do it, and this is the way we do it, whether it's the best way or not.
Exactly. You're not going to get a lot of pet parents coming in 3 separate times to bring their fuzzy butt in to get 3 separate shots. It's hard enough to get pet parents in 1 time a year to see their GP, their veterinarian. So it does basically boil down to a risk management issue in the end. And then, like you said, what outcome do you really want? But that's a perfect dovetail into talking about another very complex subject, which is cancer immunology. What do pet parents need to know about the role that immunology plays in cancer genesis and treatment, and more importantly, what can pet parents do to bolster or create a better microenvironment for their immune system that could prevent cancer?
Yeah, those are great questions, and I'm going to actually start with an answer to your last one, which is what can pet parents do to bolster their dog's immune system to prevent or delay cancer? And the answer is we have no idea. So all of the things that are advertised to be immune stimulants are basically not. One of the things that we all need to recognize is that the immune system is incredibly powerful. And if we tilt the balance of the immune system to more activation, we create pathology, we create disease. And if we suppress, if we tilt the balance to suppress immunity, we create disease. So the fine balance of the immune system is really critical, and you don't want to overactivate it and you don't want to underactivate it. And so I can tell you that you see a lot of people that take supplements every day and they're walking around perfectly healthy without autoimmune disease. And that just tells you right there that the supplements are not really activating their immune system to any meaningful extent. It's a great business model for the people who sell supplements, but it's not particularly based on good evidence. So the question is, how does the immune system contribute to health and disease? And then can we use the immune system to treat diseases, and in particular cancer? And I think the immune system absolutely contributes to health and disease. So we know that there is a term that we call immunosurveillance. This has been controversial for over a century, but I think it is well accepted now that immunosurveillance happens. And that's basically that the immune system is literally running around your body, your whole body, trying to understand if there are abnormal or pathological events happening that need to be managed. And so we know that if you take an individual's immune system away, there are strains of mice that don't have an immune system. There are conditions that have been characterized in kids and in dogs where their immune system is defective for a genetic reason. And those individuals are more susceptible to cancer, and they get cancer at a younger age as compared to the rest of the population. Doesn't always happen, but as a population, immunodeficient individuals get more cancer, and they get cancer earlier. So that tells us that the immune system is an important component of keeping us healthy over time. We also know that as we age, biological aging is not exactly the same as chronological aging. Chronological aging is how many years you've gone around the sun. Biological aging is how your body is changing in response to its whole environment. So we have to think about biological aging, and biological aging diminishes the function and the activity of your immune system. Okay, again, old cars don't run as well as new cars. And so I think it is important as we get older and as our pets get older to be more vigilant about their activity, their exposures, things that they do. And that doesn't mean lock them in a safe, right? But it does mean just maintaining that healthy lifestyle, and pay attention to the fact that a 7-year-old dog, healthy as they might be, might need less activity and might run more slowly and maybe not as far as a 2-year-old. So I think we have to pay attention to those things. In terms of therapy, I think this is a very exciting time because we are learning how to manipulate the immune system to treat cancer and other diseases. And in the context of cancer, again, I underscore the immune system is really powerful. If you use the immune system to kill cancer cells, there is a risk factor or a potential toxicity that you can kill the patient. So we know that activating immunotherapy that activates the immune system in a cancer patient can result in death, not due to the cancer, but due to the therapy. So that's one thing that people need to understand when they say, I want immunotherapy for my dog, that there is a risk of death, right? And it's not a trivial risk of death. I think we are following in the steps of success that has been achieved for human patients. We recognize that success remains limited. So on a really, really, really good day for the right tumor, maybe 40% of patients with a particular type of cancer will respond to immunotherapy. That's great compared to 0, but it's still less than half, right? So you still don't have even 50-50 odds of coming out positively on the other side, and there are risks of toxicity. One of the things that I think we need to recognize is that dogs are not small people. And what's worked to activate the immune system of a person to treat a cancer is not necessarily going to be exactly the same thing that we need to activate to treat a cancer of a dog, and vice versa. So I think canine studies that are foundationally based on questions about how the dog immune system works, and learning more about the dog immune system will get us farther faster in applying canine immunotherapy than just mimicking what's worked in humans. Certainly, there's a lot of interest in understanding how those things that seem to work in humans or that are being developed in humans might work in dogs and inform the path of development. And I think that's great. And I think there's phenomenal opportunities, and we are doing that ourselves. At the same time, I think we still have to remember dog, not small human. And so we need to think of dog in the context of dog.
Yeah, I had to catch myself and sometimes how I word questions to different guests. I should have known interviewing and talking to a veterinarian how to phrase the question correctly. Now your dogs do you have geriatric dogs? What are the ages of your Fuzzybutts?
Our current dogs are not. They're 5 and 2, and 5 of course makes me nervous because she's past that evolutionary determined age, right? The other one is just under 2.
Okay,
but
so
we've had geriatric dogs in the past for sure.
Sure. So the question I should have asked is, in terms of supporting the immune system and preparing your dog for the geriatric phase of their life, where they're, like you said, it's an older car, it doesn't operate as well as it used to. What do you do with your dogs? Do you give any supplements? What do you do with your dogs?
We do not. We keep them exercised. We balance their diet. I will confess, my dogs get some of the food that I eat. It is just that relationship, right? To the horror of our nutritionist. But I think we try to I think the rule of thumb is I can't remember if it's either 85 or 90% of the calories should come from balanced dog food, and less than 5% or 10% from treats. And so we try to live by that rule. We don't always make it. But daily we have activities with the dogs, whether it's inside, whether it's playtime, whether it's obedience, whether it's agility, whether it's going out to the park and playing frisbee, whether it's going cross country. We live in Minnesota. We have snow 6 months of the year, so cross country skiing, snowshoeing. We spend a fair amount of our time paying attention to our dogs' mental and physical health, and we try to feed them an appropriate diet, and our dogs don't get any supplements because they don't need them.
Got it. That's good advice, though, and it's something that I always try to ask and remember to ask is, what does the vet do with their dog? Because I think that's probably the better indication of what the typical pet parent should do. How far away are we do you think, from having immunotherapy in canines?
Well, not very far away. How effective it will be across the board, I don't know, but not very far. So there is, if you look at the scientific literature, there are papers every month, if not every week, about new immunotherapy approaches in canine cancer. This is work that's been going on since the 80s, right? And in the 80s, there might have been one paper a year or one paper every 5. And now we're maybe at one paper every week, if not, more. And so I think that the challenge is, how do we actually get these products out of the research environment and into the clinic? And I think that there's a tremendous emphasis in the regulatory agencies trying to understand how these therapies should be regulated for dogs. There's actually some of the therapies are regulated by the USDA, some are regulated by the FDA. We don't need to get into the level of details, but there's a real challenge when a university is not going to have the resources to bring an immunotherapy product to market. It requires a private industry. And there are real challenges in the private industry to actually be able to overcome the regulatory challenges and to some extent the uncertainty, and to understand the financial rewards. These things are very expensive to develop and they're expensive to manufacture, and they will not at the beginning be accessible to many pet owners. So I think it's the best answer that I can say is patience. They are coming, and the indications will be probably pretty narrow in the beginning. But I am part of a phenomenal consortium that's called the Precinct Consortium, managed through the National Cancer Institute. And the consortium involves a number of people from a number of institutions, both in the US and internationally, focused entirely on canine cancer immunotherapy. And so I'm privy to really exciting work that's being done to move these therapies along. And some of them are very conventional, trying things that have worked in humans and trying to figure out the nuts and bolts as to how they would work in dogs. And some of them are totally new, different ideas that just make your eyes go big, and as a scientist, they make your mouth water because it's so exciting.
Well, one of the reasons that we wanted you on Fuzzybutts and Friends to talk about is one of the big cancer killers in dogs, hemangiosarcoma. And Modiano Labs has been doing research, I think you said, for 20 years on hemangio. So we don't have a lot of time to go through. It's a very complicated disease, but talk to pet parents. What do they need to know about hemangio? Start from the beginning with symptoms. Take us through it, please.
Yeah, so hemangiosarcoma is a very insidious disease, meaning it's silent. You don't know it's there until it's there with a vengeance. And so one of the real challenges in managing this disease is that by the time we find it, it's very advanced. And advanced cancers are notoriously difficult to treat. I think that one of our contributions has been to really change the paradigm of understanding where the cancer comes from and how it forms. Because I think one of the reasons that our therapies have not been particularly successful is that we didn't really understand where the cancer comes from and why it tends to be so resistant to the therapies that we apply. The lethality of hemangiosarcoma is really related mostly to the risk of bleeding. And so managing the risk of bleeding is really important. And really the best way to manage that is through surgery. So hemangiosarcoma is one of the few cancers where we say, even if there's presence of metastasis, surgery might be indicated, right? So it's not going to necessarily control the tumor spread, but it's going to reduce the probability of a life-threatening bleed. There are not many things that work against hemangiosarcoma. The only one that we know works to some extent is what we call the standard of care: surgery, chemotherapy, in some cases, radiation therapy. Everything else is experimental or useless. And so when people use other approaches to manage hemangiosarcoma, I just think it's important for them to remember that any experimental treatment, no matter how innocuous, carries a risk of toxicity. So there's potential harm to the patient. Every experimental treatment carries a risk of emotional harm because of unrealized expectations, right? I read that this magic stuff is going to make my dog better. And when the dog doesn't get better, it can create real emotional harm to the family, particularly if there's vulnerable individuals, right? If it's a therapy dog or if there's kids in the household, that can be really, really damaging. And it's important to recognize we're not sociologists, but we have to be. And the third is financial risk. So there's stuff that's being sold on the internet that is not inexpensive. And I always tell people, you know what? It would be so much better if you went to the pet store and bought your dog a really fun toy and spent 2 hours playing with your dog. It would get a lot more benefit than whatever this other stuff is going to do. I think it's important to recognize that a lot of hemangiosarcoma related death is due to what we call premature euthanasia, driven by fear. Every family needs to make their own decision as to what is the right thing for them. I think in many cases, our profession tends to push people to do premature euthanasia because it's so hopeless. And we've seen dogs that had hemangiosarcoma that weren't treated, that lived for weeks, months, and even years. And that's because the family did not want euthanasia and the dogs did okay. That doesn't mean that every dog should that doesn't mean that euthanasia should not be considered, or that every dog with hemangiosarcoma is going to have a long life, right? But it just means we really need to consider whether premature euthanasia is doing the family or the dog any favors. And again, it's a very individual decision. And finally, breed profiling. We need to stop breed profiling. We see hemangiosarcoma across breeds, little dogs, big dogs, mixed breed dogs. And so while it is possible that some breeds might get the disease more often than others, it is not a disease that necessarily runs in families. So whatever risk is in the breed seems to be in the breed. And it is really not a breed specific disease. So we are making advances. We have a lot of trials. We have a lot of research going on in the area. We're very excited about the future of being able to not only treat and control the disease, but potentially be able to detect it early, potentially prevent it, and be able to assign risk years before the disease happens so that we can actually manage that risk. But right now, the things that we can do are really consider, if you want to do therapy, start with a standard of care. If that's not to your liking, anything else is experimental, and think about what are the data supporting the experiments and what's the experience of the group doing it. Not anecdotally. I don't want to know about the one dog that was successful. I want to know about the 300 dogs that failed. Think very, very closely about not breed profiling, and there are no known risk factors. So exposure to this or exposure to that or exposure to the next, there are no known risk factors. So there's nothing that you should avoid exposing your dog to that's going to reduce that likelihood of hemangiosarcoma.
I think that's why it makes it so frightening, though, because like you said, it's the silent killer, and then we have absolutely no idea how it occurs, why it occurs. There's not really a comparable hemangio in humans. There's angiosarcoma, which is similar. It's just one of those things. I wanted to take this opportunity that one of the things that we do, Dr. Modiano, on the show every episode is to reinforce and emphasize the necessity of consulting with a board certified veterinary oncologist. They're going to have the answers, but more important, like you were saying, they'll discourage you from getting on the internet, Googling, and then finding all these immunology treatments, these things that someone profiteers, snake oil salesmen are trying to make money off, that can, like you were saying, can end up doing more harm than good. So please, if you think it's hard to become symptomatic of hemangio, but if you suspect your dog has hemangio, definitely go see a board certified oncologist. One of the things I want to talk about briefly, it's a tough subject, but it's something that I have a particular interest in. It's premature euthanasia because of hemangio. That's a big number. I think I was talking to an oncologist recently on the show. I think they said it was high. 60% of all deaths are from premature euthanasia. It's pretty high, right?
It's very, I don't have a number, but yes, it is very high. I know some of my colleagues who have expressed an opinion that says that treating any dog with hemangiosarcoma is a travesty because we are extending suffering. I don't believe that is true. I think that the decision to treat or not to treat and how to treat really belongs to the family, and our job is to provide information and options and to educate the family so that they can make the best informed decision. But yes, I believe that a lot of times the decision is influenced either by an authority figure or by fear. And again, you remember I said our vision is to create a world where we no longer fear cancer. So the first thing that we're trying to do in doing things like this, this interview, is to try to tell people that cancer is very fearsome, but it's not as fearsome as we are. We are a much fiercer group than cancer will ever be, and we have the tools to manage it. And I don't know if I'll see it in my generation, but we have the tools to actually make cancer something just like another cold, and not to say that the cold doesn't kill people. We have an outbreak of canine influenza right now, but this is, I think that there is hope for the future. And the first thing we need to do is recognize that our emotions can influence our actions. And we need to within the context of our ability, we need to try to be more objective.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot more tools in our toolbox. We have a greater body of corpus of knowledge about cancer and our canine companions. Certainly than we did 15 years ago when I started this part of my life, which I've devoted to understanding why our fuzzy butts get cancer. And there's a lot of hope for the future. I would definitely love to learn the name or be connected with your colleague that thinks that treatment of hemangiosarcoma in any respect is suffering. That's controversial, but I certainly would love to give them a platform and hear them out as to why they think that's the case. I think that's a bit concerning. None of the oncologists I've ever talked to said that, but premature euthanasia, though, most of it's rooted in the only way to biopsy and be for sure is opening the dog up, correct? And the concern is you're going to open the dog up to do a biopsy, and then they're going to be riddled with tumors, and then you have to make the decision right there. Is there any work, and this is sort of a pointed question, is there any work being done on looking for enzyme levels or other markers or targets that we can detect in the bloodstream that could give an up or down as to whether? Okay, good, please.
Yeah. So of course you hit one of my favorite subjects, right? There are in fact 2 tests in the market, and I think at least one of them is rooted in really good data. I don't know all the ins and outs of the data. There's a lot of stuff that is proprietary, so I hesitate to discuss it. But there are at least 2 outfits that are offering early detection or confirmatory tests. And I think that it's good to have those, and veterinarians should be informed about what exactly the tests measure and how to use the information, right? So if you get the result, what are you going to do with it? So I think it's really important not to just run the test, but to actually say, this is what I'm going to do when I receive the results, right? We are developing a battery of test platforms. So the one that maybe people have heard of is what we call the Shine On project, which is looking for cells in the blood that actually form or remodel the cancer home, what we call the cancer niche. And so these are cells that are very infrequent in blood, but they do form patterns that we can actually identify. And those patterns not only inform on the potential presence of cancer, but on the risk of cancer. So what we've done, and one of the reasons that you won't find this test in the market, is we've been very diligent to ask, and if you find it, what are you going to do about it, right? So let's say that your dog is 5 years old and healthy, and you all of a sudden get the news that the dog is at high risk. And so we're doing this experimentally in a trial, and we are using a fantastic drug that was developed here at the University of Minnesota and that came to us through a really fun story of serendipity. But it turns out that this drug is incredibly safe enough to use in otherwise healthy individuals. And that one of the things that it does, in addition to potentially kill cancer cells, is it suppresses that environment. It actually goes to where the cancer is building the home, and it burns down the home. So even if there's cancer cells remaining, they don't have a place to live, they're very unhappy, and they can't form clinical disease. So it delays or prevents the occurrence of cancer. So this is the premise that we're testing. The work is ongoing. We have other platforms that use other approaches to look at blood samples and ask the question about whether there is cancer present, whether the treatment is working, whether there's a risk for cancer in the future. And we are very excited about the potential to actually bring all those out to the community as well through either ourselves or through partnerships. But again, I think it's really important to recognize that, I get the platform and I get to be very excited about what we do, but there are other people that are doing similar stuff, and there are actually a couple of products in the market. So I think the most important take-home message for today is not whether or not the test is available. It is. It's a question of, do you trust the test? And if you trust the test, what are you going to do about it? And I think that those are really relevant questions. And I think it will really change this paradigm of opening the dog and saying, oh my God, I can't take it all out, right? So what am I going to do? Because it may be that you choose to do chemotherapy or some novel experimental treatment in advance to reduce the tumor burden. that will then allow the surgeon to go in and say, I'm not taking out a watermelon, I'm taking out a grape, right? And so I think that it will create opportunities for us to hopefully be more creative and more intelligent about the way we apply these therapies, and hopefully reduce the incidence of premature euthanasia.
Yeah, I like how you said that, or how I frame it out is, of what use is additional diagnostic data if you've already made a medical decision or a treatment decision, right?
Right.
So I'm very excited. Was that called the Shine On project?
Shine On project. Yep.
Okay, and
It's a testing and it's a combination of testing and prevention.
I love it. I'm going to dig into that and do some more due diligence on that. And it's fascinating that you're looking at patterns, because I always figured that AI, artificial intelligence, is going to play a significant role in being able to understand this complex cascade and do a better job of it. So whatever we can do to reduce the amount of premature euthanasias for dogs that don't need to be euthanized because they don't have a malignant tumor inside them. All right, as we wrap up, one more thing. It's very exciting. You've got a ton of research, as we discussed before we started recording the show. You and I could probably talk for hours and hours about all the exciting research you have going on there up at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Modiano. What else do you have in your labs? Are there any other areas of research that you'd like to go over real quick to get pet parents excited about?
Sure. I think, so we have spent time looking at very basic fundamental immunology and genomics. So a lot of the work we do is broadly applicable to understanding how the canine immune system works, how it compares to the mouse and the human, and other things that we know. We're fascinated by the context of evolution and adaptation, and how we have sort of removed natural selection from our lives, right? Humans and dogs, by replacing that with artificial selection, and what that will look like, not 10 years into the future, but far into the future. And in terms of cancer, we have programs that are looking at, the most common cancers in dogs. So we have programs looking at lymphoma, both from the perspective of origin, classification, pathology, progression, therapy development. We have similar programs for osteosarcoma. We have a very big osteosarcoma program with very exciting links to our colleagues in the Department of Pediatrics at the medical school, trying to really make that connection between what are the similarities and the differences between bone cancer in dogs, a disease of aging, and bone cancer in kids, predominantly a disease of young kids. We've got a program trying to understand or predict the course that those tumors are going to take in kids, so that the oncologists, the pediatric oncologists, know how far to push on the treatment pedal, right? You don't want to overtreat because of all the toxicity, lifelong toxicity that kids will have if successful. You don't want to undertreat because they're at risk of dying. So we're trying to develop tests to actually find that Goldilocks treatment. We're working on the potential to develop tests to actually find the risk for disease early in kids from syndromic families. So we have a lot of work going in those areas. We have some work going in the area of melanoma. And of course, we have a big program here at the U of M that as part of an NCI designated comprehensive cancer center, we really embrace that comprehensive nature, right? So it includes treatment, prevention, control, education, and research, of course. And we try to do all of the above. And so these are exciting times, and I am probably biased, but I will say I am at the best place that I could be to make contributions to our work.
Yeah, you said you weren't a superhero. That's how we started this whole thing. But you're doing some Herculean research up there at the University of Minnesota. You've got a lot of wonderful projects going on, and that's exciting. And we will have you back on Fuzzybutts and Friends to discuss some of these things and drill down on them a bit further. But before we go, I did want to ask you a question, because osteosarcoma is one of the areas that you're researching. I think the only study that I keep referring to, I can never find, was one that was done by Dr. Ogilvy about the correlation between early neutering dogs, large breed dogs, and bone cancer. Do we have any better data about the increase in the risks for early neutering?
Yeah, so the first study that was published was in Rottweilers from David Waters' lab.
Okay.
And Dr. Waters, as you might know, is a fantastic biologist and epidemiologist. And so it's hard to find fault with that study. The only fault with the study is that it was, even though it was 600 dogs, that's still relatively small. And the bias in the United States of America is that the population of neutered dogs is really high. And so getting intact dogs is always a challenge. I will tell you that virtually every other study that has been done subsequent to that has mishandled or misused statistics. So that, one of the things that I teach students is, look, there is, in biology, there's always a dose response, right? And a dose response means that as you decrease the dose, the effect will change. And as you increase the dose, the effect will change. And hormones are a dose. And so you might actually have, depending on when neutering happens, you might have either a predictable dose response that goes like an upward S or like a downward S, or you might have a biphasic response where you see some increase and some decrease or vice versa. Right? If the data look like a bad day in the stock market, then that's not biology. That's artificial. And when people have to subset to drill down from 1,200 dogs to 4 dogs to get the answer that they want, that's bad use of statistics. And so I think if, it's very easy to criticize papers, right? And I think one time I heard somebody say if graduate students were paper reviewers, journals would be 4 pages long because graduate students are hypercritical. And so every paper has flaws. But I think it's actually not that hard to go through some of those studies and find that the flaw was either in the data that was already collected that they had to work with, and that was a biased data set, or the analysis was not done as well as it should have been. So I think one of the things that we have been privileged to do is to work across multiple breed clubs. And because we work with breed clubs, that means we actually get access to a lot of breeding stock or potential breeding stock, which means that we have a higher representation of non-neutered dogs than the general population. We don't have formal statistics that I can share with you because the study was not designed to ask that question. But informally, I can tell you that we do not see any correlation between neutering early, late, or never, and the incidence of any of the cancers that we look at.
Wow.
So what I tell people is make your decisions for neutering based on objective data that is quantifiable. So I think there's a lot of really good data emerging about bone and cartilage maturation, growth plate closure, orthopedic issues. There's a lot of really good data, despite the fact that some people will want to negate it. There's a lot of really good data about spaying and mammary cancer risk. So I think the nuance of that is that 40% of mammary cancers that happen in intact females are benign, right, and might need no therapy or conservative therapy. But nonetheless, there's a very, very strong correlation between spaying and the time of spaying and the risk of mammary cancer in female dogs. And so I think that's a real thing to think about. And people should not neuter or avoid neutering based on their fear of whether or not the dog's going to get cancer, because if it plays a role, we can actually infer some of the biology of why that might be. But the reality is that there's a lot of other things that are much more important. And so I think people need to consider the health of the dog, both in terms of its orthopedics, in terms of its weight management, in terms of its reproductive potential, in terms of its impetus for roaming and running in front of a mail truck, and also in terms of potential aggressive behavior, right? And other behaviors that come with being intact versus being neutered. And so again, I go back to the fact that pet overpopulation is a real thing. We need to, the single largest cause of death for dogs in the United States of America is euthanasia in a shelter because they're unwanted. And so we need to be very cognizant of that in terms of what we do about maintaining dogs that are able to reproduce. That being said, it should be a very individual decision for families and their fuzzy butts. right? To actually think about what is it that they expect? What are their expectations? What is their relationship? What is sort of the life that they want to give this dog? And of course, if they're intending to show the dog in the ring, or if they want to breed it, that's a really easy decision, right? If you don't want to do either one of those things, then I think you need to start stacking up the other ones. And I will close this interview maybe with going back to our vision, which is we wish to create a world where we no longer fear cancer. And we don't think that people should be making decisions based on fear of cancer. They should be making decisions on information that is objective, quantifiable, that we can support, and it's not based on emotional fear.
I'd add one thing to that, and we need more data.
We need more. We absolutely need more data. We absolutely need
I
more data.
love your tagline, where we no longer fear cancer, because you know, being in the canine cancer world 15 years, to see all the clever ones about we are the cure, we're going to get rid of it, eradicating cancer, and it just sets such unrealistic expectations out there in the universe that I just don't like it. So it's a great tagline. And speaking of data, Dr. Modiano, is any of the data or research that your wonderful lab does, is that available? Is there a public portal out there?
Well, the easiest way is actually to search through you know, portals like Google, ideally Google Scholar or PubMed, and they can find all of our publications. Our Clinical Investigation Center website has a list of current and past studies with the published data from each of those studies. We are constantly publishing. We've got some really exciting work going on with our friends in the College of Science and Engineering, trying to so this will blow your mind. One of my colleagues in engineering has this dream to create nanobots that respond to magnetic signals, and that you can actually put into the bloodstream and will seek out the cancer cells, and using magnetic signals will actually demolish those cells from the inside. You know, what a vision, right? And
That's
I'm
awesome.
very excited to be part of that. And we've got a rash of papers that have come out trying to understand the opportunities from nanotechnology to do diagnostics and therapeutics. And so we, for a variety of reasons, we do not have a list of our publications on our website, but they're pretty accessible through portals at the university, CIC, as well as public databases.
Well, next time I'm up in the Twin Cities, I'd love to come out and take a tour of your lab, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, we would love to have you, and we will treat you like the king that you are.
Well, Phil Bergman thought that you and I would get along very well together because of our respective love of discovery and data, and this was an incredibly enjoyable podcast. Dr. Modiano, I want to thank you for your time today, and thank you for being here on Fuzzybutts and Friends.
And I certainly appreciate the opportunity. It's been really fun, Luke. And I do want to close by saying thank you to Phil for making the connection. You know, what an awesome guy.
Yeah, I love him.
We were resident mates, and I followed his career. He's been amazing. And again, Ginger, if you're listening, get better.
I appreciate that. You know, I love to have more clinically practicing veterinary oncologists, but after this interview, stay in your lab. You're doing wonderful work there. It's exciting, and I can't wait to tour it. All right, everybody, this wraps up this episode of Fuzzybutts and Friends. I'd like to thank Dr. Jaime Modiano, the director of Modiano Labs at University of Minnesota, for being a part of the episode. As you know, we drop every Tuesday. You can watch this, the video portion, on our YouTube channel at fuzzybuttsstudios.com, or you can listen to it, the podcast version, on any platform like iHeartRadio and Spotify. We'll see you next week. Puppy up. Talk soon.